Today we're doing eschatology. Eschatology literally means the study of the last. When it comes to Christian theology, eschatology is referring to the last things. It could be death, or dying, or heaven, hell, resurrection, life after death. All of these topics are included in what we call eschatology. Why are we covering eschatology in this unit? Because Matthew does some pretty decent eschatology, more so than Mark and Luke. Matthew does a little bit more of the kingdom of heaven imagery than any of the other gospels. Jesus conveys for us in all the gospels what's truly important. And that's compassion, it's loving your neighbor. Luke demonstrated that the best. But Matthew also has a pretty good line, and John parallels it in his gospel, when some Pharisees come up to Jesus and they ask him, Jesus, what is the greatest commandment?
Jesus replied,
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments.
Now, this looks like Jesus is saying two separate commandments, but in actuality, these are complementary commandments. Because if you are truly loving God with your whole heart, with your whole soul, and with all your strength, you will love what God loves. You are going to love God's loves. And we know going back to Genesis 1, when God looked at all creation, He said it was good. God loves His creation. And what we see through Jesus Christ is that He has this particular fondness towards human dignity and saving humanity. So when we love one another, we are honoring God. We are loving God. How does this exactly fit in with eschatology? We'll skip 3 more chapters to Matthew 25, and you have what is typically referred to as the Last Judgment parable, or the parable of the sheep and the goats, whatever you want to call it. And although I hate the movie Godspell with a passion, pun intended, it does a pretty decent job of showing us this parable, so check it out.
When the Son of Man comes in all His glory, with all His angels with Him, He will sit in state upon His throne, with all the nations gathered before Him. And then He will separate the men into 2 groups, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And then He'll put the sheep on His right, and the goats on His left. Over there. And then He will say to those on His right, Sheep, you have my Father's blessing.
Oh, wonderful.
Come and enter the kingdom that has been ready since the world was made. For when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink.
That's nothing.
When I was naked and without a home, you took me to your house. And when I was ill and in prison, you came to my aid.
The sheep, the followers, the faithful, on God's right hand. The goats, the unfaithful, the people that were looking only out for themselves, God's left hand. You all remember what that means.
Yeah.
And then they will say to Him,
Oh, Master, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you drink?
Yeah, or in prison and helped you.
and He will say to them, anything you did for one of your brothers, however humble, you did for me. And He will say to them, a curse is upon you. And He will say to them, anything you did not do for one of your brothers, however humble, you did not do for me. And then they will take their place in eternal punishment. But the righteous shall have eternal life.
Jesus says, whatever you do to the least of my brothers, you are doing unto me. So ultimately, what God is going to measure our holiness against, what He's going to measure our salvation against, is going to be the way we treat our neighbor. It's not how many Our Fathers you say. It's not how many times you go to church. It's not how many rosaries you do. It's how you treat the least of your neighbors. This is often referred to as the corporal works of mercy. Feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, clothing the naked, sheltering the homeless, visiting the sick, visiting the imprisoned, and burying the dead. Jesus, in His whole 3-year ministry, only taught us one prayer. It's not saying prayers that our salvation's going to be measured against. It's what we're doing. It's what we're doing to our neighbors. It's our compassion that's going to save us.